Welcome today. For those who don't know me, my name is Tom Malingo. I'm one of the co-founders of Brandjectory, along with my lovely wife, Susan Bryanton. We're here today, and we're excited to have Peter Horne with us from Athletes First. Peter's going to share with us thoughts about how to work with a celebrity or an athlete, which is what his organization does on a regular basis, and how CPG brands can take advantage of that and be involved in it. For those who don't know Brandjectory, Brandjectory is a platform process system, whatever you want to call it, for brand founders in CPG under 10 million from seed to Series A, we like to say. The kind of brands that can be found at Whole Foods or Sprouts or any national specialty store across the country. And what we provide is access to an incredible network of investors and industry experts, and give brands the education, the experience, engagement, exposure, and education they need to grow a successful CPG business. So we do that with an extensive knowledge base and through a monthly set of virtual meetings like this, but ones that can get brand founders engaged with investors and industry experts and solve problems and do a number of things that get people better and smarter and faster at fixing problems and learning about the industry. So we're excited to do that. We do it all at a great value. Many of our friends here and partners are on the line, and we're excited that we're here. But that's what we do. And if you want to find out more, just reach out to Tom at brandjectory.com or Susan at brandjectory.com. And I will be putting Peter's contact information and our contact information, everything you need to know, into the chat as we go along. So with that, Peter, I'm going to have him join us in just a second here, and he'll be sharing his screen and walking us through some thoughts. If you do have questions, please put them in the chat, and we'll get to them at the end. We're going to leave time for Q&A. So if you have questions, please put them in the chat. We'd love to hear what those are and address them as we get to the end of this session. So Peter's going to chat for about 35 minutes. And it's one thing, I got in touch with Peter earlier this year. I believe it was through Justin Deems sent Peter my way. And we've had some great discussions and talked a lot about brands. And Peter picked up on something that we've talked a lot about. You know, everybody wants to have somebody on their side who has the connections and has the social media backing. And I've seen brands, chase athletes and celebrities for years across LA and New York, trying to get their attention and get them to look at their brand. So today what Peter's going to share with us is how you go about working with an athlete, how what they're involved in, what they do, what does it mean to have them as a sponsor, an investor, in a partnership deal, as a organically grown supporter of your brand, and so that's what the discussion is going to be about. And I'm going to turn it over to Peter now to introduce himself, his company, and share with us his thoughts about all that. And again, please put questions in the chat, and we'll get to them at the end. And please, if your phones aren't muted, please mute them. We're going to have a lot of people on the line, and really want to make sure everybody gets to hear what Peter is saying. So with that, Peter Horne, please take over and tell us a little bit about yourself and about Athletes First.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Tom. I will share my screen to get things started. Let me know. Can you see that, Tom? Awesome. Okay, cool. Yeah, well, my name is Peter Horne. As Tom mentioned, I work at Athletes First. We're a leading sports agency that works with top talent in great events across the country. We're football focused, and I'll get into some of those details as we go through the presentation. But I'm excited to talk to you all today about connecting with athletes, connecting with sports opportunities, how brands can best position themselves to have successful relationships in this space. All right. Quick agenda for today. I just want to make sure that we're all on the same page going into this. So I'll give a bit of an intro on Athletes First, talk about the influence of today's athletes, how we can identify opportunities from a brand side, keys to a strong partnership, where and how athletes are adding value. And then I'll touch a little bit on how we position ourselves with partnerships with brands, provide a couple case studies, and then some high-level takeaways. And as Tom mentioned, we'll have some time for questions at the end. And, as questions pop up too, I'm happy to answer them. But if we want to save all those for the end as well, that works. So yeah. A little bit about athletes first. As I mentioned, we're a leading sports agency. We represent more players, coaches, general managers, and broadcasters than any other agency in the world. We're focused on football primarily. We've grown our marketing business to have a little bit of a baseball presence as of late. We've recently signed Mookie Betts of the LA Dodgers and Vlad Guerrero Jr. of the Toronto Blue Jays as marketing clients, but we're primarily focused on the NFL and football at this moment. We've grown up as a contract representation agency, so working with the players and the coaches and the execs, making sure they're compensated well for their on-field participation and how they're doing, how they're playing. But over the years, the team that I sit on operates under our marketing business, and so we've been able to build out a strong wing of business on the marketing side, which is reflected on this side. So not only do we represent the players on the field, but we work closely with them off the field, which will be the center of this discussion today, thinking about how we can best position brands to connect with talent, but then also thinking about other opportunities in sports. That we have a new budding properties division, which is the team that I sit on most closely, thinking about relevant moments throughout the season, primarily in football, but also in the off season as well. Whether that's college tours and in the fall around big college football games, we do a big Super Bowl activation, and then other things in the off season that get our players ready for the season, and charity moments as well. And then, probably most relevant for you guys, not only on the talent side, but also in thinking about building out a holistic brand campaign with a player, with talent, or an opportunity in sports, is how you're going to distribute that and tell that story, through media and distribution. And so, for us, I'll get into the game plan a little bit later, but and thinking about how we want to work. We want to have a holistic campaign. We want, a top player to be a part of it. We want it to be reflected at a big moment throughout the year. And then we also want fans to hear about it all over social media and other channels digitally. As I mentioned, our team is dedicated to helping brands connect to culture. We want to help brands tell their story. A few highlights here. One that I like to talk about is Chad Henne, that Bud Light example in the top middle. Chad won a Super Bowl as the backup quarterback for the Kansas City Chiefs, and we had some team on site at the Super Bowl. This was in Phoenix, and they were able to toss him a Bud Light after the game and capture that moment. Bud Light was stoked about it because it was super relevant. Another key point that I'll get into as we talk today, but always capturing the relevance. Chad was the backup quarterback, but relevance and the moment was so big that anything that they were going to do right then was super impactful. And so thinking about how we can help connect your brands, in sports and with athletes, we want to make sure that we're telling those really relevant stories at the right moments and with the right talent. This just goes to kind of a broader discussion about how influential athletes are in general, and specifically reaching a younger audience. 74% of Gen Z athletes say that athletes are influential in their buying habits and purchases. This is something that we talk about all the time with our players, is that they're not only athletes, they're brands, they're creators, they're investors, they're tastemakers. What they do is will be trend setting for a large group of people. They are trustworthy. They have credibility with their fans, both in market and across the country. And, the better they play on the field, the more credibility they gain off the field. And so aligning their own brand with top CPG companies like yours is super helpful and will drive, return on what you guys are looking to do. So, just because they're positioning themselves as their own brand, I think, it's a great opportunity to connect and work together. I think they are ideal partners. And Fred Warner, who's pictured here, is a great example. He, not only is the best linebacker and highest paid linebacker in the NFL, he's also, a podcaster. He has a podcast with his wife, and it allows them to tell their story and, tell different brand stories as well. It's a whole different vertical for him to invest his time in marketing partnerships and brand partnerships and really building that part of his kind of portfolio off the field, which he's, a great spokesperson. He's a polished football player, but he's an even better person. And I think that goes to the trustworthiness that these top athletes have with their audience. And thinking about, finding your perfect match, these next couple slides kind of mesh together. But I think a big takeaway here is aligning, on values, lifestyle, and audience overlap. So, I talk to brands all the time, and one of the questions I'm always asking is, what audience are you trying to reach? Where are you trying to reach your audience? And I think that's a very, valuable, takeaway in terms of thinking about how you want to partner with, specific talent or just work in sports in general is understanding who you're trying to reach. And a lot of times, brands and products will have specific target audiences, but in thinking about the nitty gritty details, I think that's the best in terms of identifying relevant talent to connect with. And this kind of comes through with, tapping into who they are off the field. Football specific and unique in the sense that these guys wear helmets and people don't necessarily know what they look like or, who they are off the field. But the more in depth you can get with the specific player or, even with an agency like ourselves, and you're asking the questions of like, we want someone in this market who's interested in this and does this in the off season and that and whatever. It makes it, that much more compelling. And, the more that the brand and the player can be aligned in their stories and their interests is exactly going to lead to a strong partnership. Highlighting a few of the segments here: food, fashion, wellness, parenting, and gaming. I feel like depending on the product, it can be really relevant to a specific talent, in different spaces. And not only relevant for off the field, but also culturally relevant, kind of like what I was alluding to earlier with the Chad Henne story. We want to make sure that you guys are activating at the most, memorable moments throughout the year with the most relevant people throughout the year. So whether it's a rookie and someone having a breakout season or a comeback, story, there's different stories that we can tell, that brands can tell, that align differently with different talent. And something to consider here with cultural relevance is also, who they are and where they play on the field. Obviously, this is football focused, but it works for any sport really. But thinking about, connecting with a quarterback versus an offensive lineman or a rookie or a veteran, there's definitely different angles that brands can take in connecting with talent. And, it just kind of just depends on what you're exactly looking for in a campaign or a partnership or, an investor or whatever it may be. These are all questions that you should be thinking about and asking yourself as you're putting together, an opportunity or, just some thoughts around connecting in this space. And kind of wrapping it all up is prioritizing storytelling and authenticity over follower count. A lot of times brands will reach out and they say, "Oh, we want someone who has 1 million followers and whatever." But the reality is, their audience will know whether or not the partnership is authentic and it's true to who they are. And if it's not, it's not going to push the needle on objectives that you guys are looking to maintain and grow on the business side. So we want to make sure that we're connecting and telling the right stories with the authentic fit. And follower count in the right moment, it's great and it helps. But if you can have someone with a lower following or a smaller following who has a really connected audience, the campaign is going to be that much stronger and the story is going to go that much further. Some keys to a great athlete partnership. This is, some high level stuff, but the product has to be something that they'll actually use. This goes to the authenticity and storytelling point from the last slide. And then, just thinking about from the athlete side, they value trust, they want simplicity, they want to share the values with the brand. A lot of times, the simplicity comes from the next point of having a clear deliverable set. So, players are so busy, their schedules are incredibly, packed and they have so many things going on at all times. And so it's really important for, brands like yourselves to have a very structured, deliverable set. You come to the player, you tell them what you want, or you go to the agent, you tell them what you want. Be very deliberate and clear with what you're looking for. I think a lot of times partnerships and deals can get lost in all the nitty gritty details sometimes. But if you have everything aligned, you know, from the start of the conversation, or you have a really strong vision on what you're looking to accomplish, that makes our jobs easier. It makes, the player more interested or less interested. But, if you can tell us exactly what you're looking for and be very deliberate in that, it just makes the whole process that much smoother. And it also will allow you to, get to whoever you're looking to get to. Sometimes, you might not have a specific player in mind or an athlete or an opportunity or whatever it may be, but the more, clear cut you can be on the vision, the better it is going to lead to the results, both on the talent side and then also just the storytelling side, event, whatever it may be. And then the last part too, I think it's important to prepare for long term opportunities. There might be some short term results, but over time, the brand equity that you'll get in working with a specific talent or talent, group or whatever it may be, is something that you should be thinking about. I think it's, a very valuable opportunity to connect with a player and, use their audience and their reach. But it's best if it's, over a longer period of time. players are happy to post, one-off things for, some money and move on and whatever it is. But the most valuable, strong partnerships are going to be the ones that grow together, where the player's excited to hop on a call with a brand, or be involved with it, or show up to an event, or whatever it may be. We want to make sure that the brand work that we're doing with our players is that of long-term partnership, and that we can build it over time. All right, here's where and how athletes are adding value, and I will say I broke it up into 5 different segments. Some overlap with others, and some don't. But just kind of going left to right here. You have your traditional marketing opportunities, your endorsements. I chose Tua Tagovailoa. He's one of our clients on the Miami Dolphins, and he has a massive partnership with Gatorade, and being with Gatorade Muscle Milk as well, because they're a part of the same portfolio. But Gatorade has been a great partner for Tua for years. But this is a more just traditional endorsement opportunity. Obviously, Gatorade's a massive company, and they've grown, and they're a partner of the NFL, and they have all these relationships. But he's become just a huge vocal point for their brand in football. Miami is a key market for them, and he's obviously being the face of the franchise down there. He's been able to position himself really well, and I'll get to it when I touch more closely on live events. But it's interesting too how brands are positioning themselves to be a part of the players' life more holistically off the field. Tua does a lot of charitable work, and he's always trying to give back to the community, and Gatorade has found ways to effectively get into those opportunities as well, which is great for any brand partnership and endorsement deal.
Sorry, I just turned it in.
All good. The next portion is about investments, and DK is actually not one of our clients, but DK Metcalf has a really cool partnership with Bazooka. He's a huge candy guy. I was reading a little bit about this partnership, and it was exciting and fun to learn about how DK's positioned himself in this space. He has a sweet tooth, and he wanted to get to know the CEO of Bazooka. And I guess how the story goes is that the CEO was interested in just getting to know DK, and thought he was a candy snob. And it turned out that DK wanted to play a more prominent role in the relationship and the brand, and so he actually became an investor in the business and did some cool partnerships and endorsements around it. He did a really interesting jewelry collaboration with a jeweler in New York City around like their little bazooka pop that they have, and it went viral. And I'm guessing this is where a lot of you all are looking to have the connection point with athletes and have them act as investors, and speaking at different events and whatnot about your brands. But I will say, like, it isn't for everyone. DK's been paid a few times. He's had a couple contracts, so he's got a little extra gas in the tank. But some of the players are super interested in this, and some are less interested. It definitely is a space that's heating up and has a lot of buzz, but it's not for everyone. DK is a great example of it working effectively, and being able to be a storyteller for Bazooka and the work that they do, and tell it in really unique ways. Like I mentioned, the jewelry example is something that was super out of left field, but it worked really well, and it was a really cool partnership there. So it's not for everyone, but for those that it is, it can be very successful, and DK has done a nice job with that. The ambassadorship kind of vertical is similar to the marketing and endorsement one, but I think it's a little bit unique in the sense that it's about long-term brand alignment and storytelling. And the example here that I love to touch on is Cooper DeJean, who's one of our clients. I don't know if we have any Eagles fans in the group, but obviously came off of an incredible rookie season. Having a pick six against Patrick Mahomes in the Super Bowl on your 22nd birthday is a great way to celebrate, but it also helped grow his relationships with his brand partners. Cooper was drafted early in the second round to the Eagles, and Cooper cheese, for those familiar, is used on the majority of Philly cheesesteaks across the city of Philadelphia. And so not only did the name resonate, but the product also was important for Philly. And we were able to, ink a nice partnership once he was drafted to Philadelphia. And it really started as a traditional endorsement deal. And Cooper was really excited about it. He's from Iowa. He's a Midwestern boy, and he loves, his mom's mac and cheese. But he was able to grow this relationship over time and really become a brand advocate for them and an ambassador. So he fulfilled all of his traditional deliverables and posting on social and promoting this and that, whatever. But as he's continued to grow his celebrity, we've found additional ways for Cooper Cheese to get involved with what he does off the field. And so a couple weeks ago, Cooper actually released a new podcast with his teammate Reed Blankenship called The Exciting Mics. And there's a segment on the show called Exciting Bites where they try local food joints from Philly, and they have, the owner will come drop off a Philly cheesesteak or a slice of pizza or whatever it may be. And in the theme of partnership and just the excitement that Cooper's had with them, he wanted to have Cooper Cheese be a part of that segment. And so Cooper Cheese has become the presenting partner of the Exciting Bites segment on their podcast, which is all about food and Philly and all that. So I think it just tells that story about building those relationships over time and the unique verticals of how brands can really get involved with athletes. It's not just having them post on social. Cooper loves this relationship and loves this partnership and loves the company and wanted to find a way for them to become a part of his new podcast, which I thought was really interesting. This is a spot. This next one, sampling and seeding, is one that I think a lot of brands can find a early value in. It's a little bit of a low lift, which I think is great, and it allows the brand to get involved and in front of a lot of high profile people. From an Athletes First perspective, we do a handful of different events throughout the year. One being our Athletes First Classic, which is a big charity golf weekend in Southern California, and a part of that weekend is having these little gift bags that all of our players and their wives and girlfriends get when they check into the hotel. And this is a great way for brands to get in front of these people in kind of an informal setting. We put together these bags, we get snacks, we get grooming products, we get whatever is relevant to their stay, and something that we think that they'll be excited about and use, and maybe ask to get introduced to them or whatever. And so we do it. A lot of other agencies and a lot of other events companies do it, but I think just the sampling and seeding element of building those authentic relationships is super important. I've seen it firsthand where we've had some products sent in a training camp gift or whatnot, and the players are following up with us. Where can I buy this for my kids or my family or whatever it may be? I'd love to learn more about this company. How can I get involved? So, I think it's a nice way to win early and get the product out there and develop those relationships. And then lastly, just wanted to touch on the live event component as well, and in thinking about getting the product to live events. Whether that's tailgate, Super Bowl parties, charity events. I mentioned that Gatorade and a few of his other partners have been big players in some of the charitable initiatives that he's led. But just thinking about getting product kind of goes hand in hand with the sampling and seeding opportunity, but getting your product at some big moments throughout the year. And last year at the Super Bowl, we do a big activation around the Super Bowl called The Block, and we did it in New Orleans this past February. And we had a whole kind of bodega that we put together, and we had a lot of brands send different products. And players are having a busy day, they're going to appearances, they're coming over to The Block, which is a great hospitality space and kind of brand activation space. And they come in after a long day of appearances, signing autographs, being in front of fans. They just want to hang out. They want a space to relax, and they come and they check out, and they snack on some different CPG companies that we've connected with, and they're checking out different opportunities on site. And so if we can find ways to weave in product into some of these moments as well, it's just a great way to seamlessly integrate with some of the biggest faces of sports in the world. So those are some opportunities. And then I just want to talk about a little bit how we operate and working with brands and thinking about how we can best tell brand stories and connect at relevant moments and with relevant players and whatnot. So I always say my job is to be a good listener. I talk to brands every day. I get on calls, and I'm here to learn about them. Like I said, I'm here to ask questions and understand what they're looking to accomplish. And I would love to do that with many of you guys on the call today. But just think about what's success look like. How do we most effectively tell your story with who, where, when, all those things. We go back to the drawing board. We think about who's the best talent to connect to this opportunity. Should we have them at the Super Bowl? Should we have them on our college tour? Should we do this, that, whatever? And to be transparent, like sometimes there isn't a right fit, and we'll let you know that, and we'll tell the brand, we think that this isn't a strong fit. We would rather wait for something else. We also recommend this, that, whatever. But when it is a right fit, which is most of the time, we'll connect on the right talent, right opportunities, put together some content and some promotion, and then in the spirit of making it a holistic campaign, we'll distribute it across different channels and really get that media and distribution that many brands are looking for. A case study here is around NFL Extra Points. They're the official credit card of the NFL, and they wanted just a one-stop shop for last season's spend around talent and events. And so we were able to be that solution for them. We were able to connect them with, top talent to Kyle Hamilton, Fred Warner, and Dean Orlovsky. And then, we produced the commercials for them. We had them show up at our properties. At the block we had in New Orleans. They had a little lounge where card member holders could come hang out. And then, in the spirit of, making sure it's a national campaign, we wanted to amplify in different markets. So we had players across the country, not necessarily in the markets that are the four key talent we're promoting throughout the season. So, we asked a lot of questions on those initial calls, trying to understand what they were looking for. And we're able to put together a whole plan and execute it for them, which was great. And they were very excited about how that went. Another case study, this is more around events. We worked with St. James Iced Tea. I don't know if any of you are familiar with them, but they're a big growing iced tea brand, and they wanted to be on college campuses around football season. We just so happened to do a whole tailgate tour around the football season where we go to the biggest college games every weekend in the fall. But they also wanted to connect with some NFL players as well. So we're like, perfect, we can do both. So they were at the biggest games in the fall, had some on-site presence, as you can see in some of these photos. We got, Jamal Charles holding it at the Austin, Texas tailgate, and then also connecting them with, big time players in the NFL. Derwin James walking in, doing his tunnel walk with his St. James iced tea. So for us, we want to identify the key, objectives for these companies, these brands, see how they want to best position themselves in sports and be that full solution for them. So just kind of giving you some ideas around how, your brand could show up and thinking about, talent or on-site or whatever it may be. And then one other one I just wanted to highlight, I know we talked about this classic a couple times, but thinking about, the event side of things, like working with athletes is great, but also working with events where the athletes are is also very important and impactful. And so our A1 Classic it's a golf event, it's a charity event. We do a very fun celebrity waiter night. We have some big names, Scott Hansen, for those who, spend their Sundays with him during football season on NFL Red Zone. He's one of our broadcasting clients, and we have some big names on the bottom there as well. But they show up, they have a great time, and there's ways for brands, not only to gift bags, but also, and some sort of sponsorship opportunities as well, being on the waiter aprons that these guys wear, showing up at the golf event. So I mean, I think, for different brands, it's just helpful to understand what's out there in the marketplace and understand, what we can do and how we can most effectively, integrate ourselves in sports. And, like I said, understanding that, working with this, Saquon Barkley would be great, but if you can work at an event where he's at, it might be a little less expensive and you might be able to make, have some stronger impact there and, just get into the most relevant opportunities. And then just wanted to highlight some key takeaways of today's discussion. I think the biggest thing is connecting with, your brand in sports is attainable. I think, you see a lot of things on social media and, I'm not coming up with anything special here, but, a lot of what you see is now what it is. Things may appear differently. This space is approachable. Some opportunities are very big and, flashy, but, there's a lot of ways to win in sports and, just making sure that you're vetting through the right opportunities, you're asking the right questions, you're being deliberate with what you're doing. It's really attainable space. And I think it should be something that, is exciting to think about. With that, it has your product definitely has to be something that the players will like and use. And a strong brand story is always going to, push things a little bit further. Like I mentioned on the sampling front, being willing to start small and, have some low lift campaigns. You don't need to hit a grand slam with no one on base. Like you just gotta, get there slow and steady, and be open to it. And, making sure that you're taking the right steps and being deliberate with what you're doing. This next point we touched on earlier, partnerships should be structured. They shouldn't be transactional. Having a defined vision is very helpful in this. And, if you see enough partnerships, I mean, my job is to, track the market and understand who's working with who and what and where. And, you see all these partnerships that are just, pay for play and they wanted so-and-so to post and they did and great. And they move on. But, the most authentic partnerships, the ones that the story really resonates with their fans and with their audience is going to be the strongest one. And, I think as you all kind of identify, markets or players or opportunities that, could be best fit for your brand, it's important to have that defined structure. And, like I said too, it cuts out a lot of wasted time and energy. And, if you, and I'm happy to be a resource in any way possible, but if there's, if you come to an agent or a player specifically or whatever, and you have a full kind of deliverable schedule and you have, this is exactly what we're looking for. It just makes the whole process a lot easier. And sometimes you don't know what you're looking for, and that's fine. And that's where you kind of go around and you ask questions and you learn. Um, but the second you have some sort of kind of idea, don't be afraid to put it down on paper and send it out and see if you can make that come to life, because the less, to find something is, the longer it's going to take. It'll probably become more expensive over time as more things pop up. So the more deliberate you can be there, the better it will be. This next one, I said, not all opportunities are created equal. This goes back to my point about not chasing celebrity. I think Tom mentioned this earlier. Chase relevance. You want to be with the most relevant people in the most relevant moments. I think that's most important. The Chad Henne example, like I mentioned earlier, he was the backup quarterback for the Chiefs. He didn't get a single snap in the Super Bowl. And, he did a Bud Light partnership the second the game ended, and it was super impactful for them. And he was super excited about it as well. Obviously you'll see the flashy stuff on social and on TV, but, you know, that's not always the case. If you can find, executing at the right moment, things can go really well. And I think that lends itself to the last point, is that, the sports world is moving fast. So you got to be ready. You got to be on your toes. And, I think just being up to date on what's happening in the space. And, I'm happy to, like I said, be a resource there as well, and let you know who's spending what, where, and how, the market's trending. But, if you're able to be nimble and move quickly and, have product ready to roll, or have certain things that you can just turn on a dime, that is going to be very helpful in positioning yourself in this space, because, some player might play really well, and, you want to get them some product, or you want to do a deal with them. And you just got to make sure that you can be, quick on your feet in this space. I think it's a little bit unique, and, the off season lends itself to a little bit slower of a schedule, and you can kind of pace it out a little bit. But in season, you got to make sure, if you're looking to invest and activate in sports, football specifically, but, in all sports, you just got to be able to move fast. So I'd say those are some of the key takeaways. Yeah, left some time for questions, so I'd love to get into it.
Yeah,
Tom, I don't know if you have any.
I'll start out. We got a couple, I think, in the chat, but I'll start with a couple. Peter, thank you for this. It was excellent, and I think you gave. I think there's a lot of great ideas there for emerging brands and how to work with you. And to start with, I guess I just would like to sort of validate. It sounds like one of the best ways and one of the lowest cost ways is to provide product. Provide product for training camps through you, or through, or locally, I guess it's possible, but to provide product, to provide product for events. I mean, it sounds like this is where, a few hundred samples can go very well to leading to a more authentic and organic relationship. Is that a correct way to summarize it?
Yeah, I think that's a great way to win early. And for us, we want to always get the best products in front of our players. If it's new, if it's something that, a space that they're interested in, we know our players very well, and, I'm sure other agencies are the same. And so, if a company reaches out to us and they say, we got this new product and we'd love to get it to so and so, like, they might have a specific player, they might not. And when they don't, that's when we come in and we're like, hey, this would be great for this opportunity, or this could be very impactful for this. So, yeah, I mean, and every, agency is different. We do our best to be as impactful for the brands, even at any level of, involvement. And so, like, we do a big training camp gift around the start of the football season, and we'll have a bunch of snack brands in there. And like I said, like, players will reach out. They're like, I need more of these. Where do I buy these? How do I, how can I develop a relationship with them? And some have actually led to endorsement deals and partnerships in that space. So it just depends. But yeah, I would say product is a great way to get going. And then also, like, like I said, there's different moments for product. There's the training camp for us. There's, college. There's Super Bowl. There's golf. There's definitely a lot of ways to win with us. There's a lot of ways to win in other places as well. But product is definitely a good place to start.
And while we're talking about product, there certainly what we saw here, there are products that are, certainly better for you products that athletes are interested in, high protein, probably, high in supplemental, and functionality things they're looking for, focus, things like that. But we also saw that, Bazooka brand and, Gatorade, which is kind of a bunch of chemicals, there's still the opportunity for all kinds of brands to find success. But what about functional, better for you, high protein, the things that, sort of drive a lot of the CPG industry? What about those things when it comes to athletes' preferences or thoughts or willingness to be involved?
Yeah, I mean, I think you know lately the story has been players are investing tens, hundreds, sometimes millions of dollars into their diet and their nutrition every year, and taking care of their bodies and putting themselves in the best position diet with their diet and their training is honestly the name of the game. And so if there's anything better for you, the players are always going to have it, first of all, interest in trying it, and then if they like it, they're going to start using it more and more. And then that's where the conversation heats up too. Like if there's a snack brand that is also high in protein, or it has some electrolytes or whatever it may be, and then they go to their training facility and they're like, hey, I actually got introduced to this company and I'd love for our training room to start buying it or whatever. I think it'd be great for our teammates to have. Like, some of that doesn't happen all the time, but it's definitely not out of the question. But I think generally the consensus is, players are more interested in taking care of their bodies and being healthy and making those decisions. Some guys are notorious for having a sweet tooth or, eating some, not so good for you food after a game if they win or maybe even if they lose. But the whole story around eating well and preparing your body. A lot of these guys have private chefs, and they have these curated menus when they come home from practice. Like it's very specific and detailed, and people are not shying away from investing their own money to make sure that their body is in the best position to succeed. So I think that lends
And
itself to better for you products across the
and I
board.
remember when Chris Paul, CP3, was here in Phoenix. I mean, he made a lot of investments in products that fit his diet, that fit his nutritional focus. And so, yeah. And speaking of which, what's the sort of the play on locality? A lot of brands, merging brands, start strong locally. They're in LA or they're in Pittsburgh or they're in Philadelphia, and they start their strong presence retail and there because it's close at hand, it's where they are. And not just local versus national and when's the time, but maybe a little bit about, with all the changes in college endorsements and how college athletes can participate. Maybe you could just spend a minute talking about that, because again, colleges tend to be more local, in any situation. There's local stars that may not be the national stars yet, but they're hot on the local college trail. So maybe you could just talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I started my career on the NIL side, so I was working closely with college football players across the country in different markets. And you're completely right. I mean, like the fandom locally in those markets is second to none. I would say that a few NFL teams match the kind of the zhuzh of college football and the fandom locally at some of these markets. I mean, working with Penn State players in State College, or Notre Dame in South Bend, Indiana, or Oregon and Eugene, Oregon. Like the fandom is crazy, and fans will gravitate and want to support their players. And in the world that we live in today, like if a college player is endorsing a product, it usually means that there's probably some opportunity for them to make money if things go well. If it's not necessarily like a national brand, but some of these deals have rev shares and rev splits, and there's different ways. I would say that's more kind of catered towards like the local restaurant opportunity. I've done some deals where kids have their own burger on the menu, and every time it sells they get a percentage of sales. And so thinking about how that is a whole part of the college endorsement space. It happens on the pro side as well, but I'd say that's more relevant for local college opportunities. um but I will say too, like it goes to the changing world that we are in, and I put that stat of 74% of Gen Z is influenced by athletes. And I think the creator economy is continuing to grow, and a lot of these kids, these athletes, specifically in college, some have reached the pro level now, but a lot of these college kids grew up on social media and they know how to create content and they know how to tell stories digitally. And so they're well versed in how to create an endorsement, video or whatever it is, UGC content. Like they all want to be able to be, storytellers and, build their own personal brands. And so if, CPG companies or whatever it may be are able to tap into those audiences early on. I think it's great. I will say, like, it's helpful to connect with athletes in markets where you can go pick up their product in the store. Obviously, there's some online presence as well, but if LA is a big market, it probably makes more sense to work with someone in that area. But I'll also say, like, kind of the college point of super fanatical fans with like some of these NFL markets too. Like Philadelphia is crazy. If you work with an Eagles player, like that audience is just going to draw very strongly to that product, and so that's something we've seen, and I think it'll continue to grow. I think the college stuff is going to continue to become a bigger player, and I will say too, like the beauty of college is that there's content creators who might not be the starting quarterback. They might play a non you know not a huge sport, but they have a huge audience and they can drive business results for brands. So I think that allows brands to tap into different angles of sports more closely. And then the NFL side, I think just focusing on the direct markets that you're looking to grow in.
Yeah, I will just say this. I mean, I remember I guess about probably 13, 14 years ago, Susan and I were at a Stanford football game out in Stanford, and we were walking by a Jamba Juice, and Zach Ertz and Kobe Fleener, both of who got to the pros, the two tight ends, showed up at Jamba Juice, and there was suddenly 150 people in Jamba Juice. Okay. And again, it was, home crowd, hometown, and things like that, but that kind of thing happens naturally. And this was long before the days when even social media had taken such a stride forward. So just interesting. Before we get to the questions, I have one more. What do you think is the sort of, just in your mind, players who get involved organically because they like the product versus ones that are actually looking for business deals, that are out there, like scoping it and trying to find, things to invest in, actually are already starting to think about the business side of things when they're athletes or when they're just newly retired?
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, I think, like I said too, like it's the investment side and the business side isn't for everyone, but those that are interested are definitely active players in the space. I you know on the basketball side of things, I think of Pat Connaughton a lot. He plays for the Milwaukee Bucks. He's actually a Notre Dame alum, and he's built up this real estate company that has over $500 million in assets, and he's definitely an active player in the space. And I saw a video this morning, actually, is pretty relevant, of him talking about how when he's looking to get athletes into his deals, he wants them to be a part of the conversation. He wants them to be on those initial calls, and he wants them to be a part of the early discussions, because if they can understand it and see how things are discussed early on, like, they can really kind of entrench themselves into the business deal or the opportunity, whatever it may be. Um, so yeah, I mean, I would say, like, organically, like, I think that's a great way to kind of get the player to trust a product, to like a product. And I think that's a really strong way to go. And then, you know, for players who have, I mean, some haven't made a ton of money, but they're interested in the space and they want to grow. But a lot of times, these players investing or taking more risky plays in the space are guys who have made, or girls who have made, significant money over the years, and so they have a little bit more runway to kind of get creative with their investment opportunities. A lot of basketball players too. I think basketball is a unique space just because each player is kind of their own brand. They can go to any team, and even Kevin Durant the other day gets traded to the Houston Rockets. I mean, his fans will follow him to Houston. They're not going to stay with him just
Right.
because he's in Phoenix. But I think basketball is unique in that space. Any individual sport, too, tennis, golf, whatever it may be, um, lends itself to having athletes be really strong storytellers. Um, but yeah, I mean, the product and the organic build too is super important. I think that's a great way to get going.
Okay, let's hit some of the questions we have here. The first one is kind of focuses around, our athletes, do they really have an appetite for emerging brands and regional brands? And, are they looking instead for, Frito-Lay or Liquid Death? And if they are those the kinds of things that, they would negotiate stock options or equity participation, things like that, if it's really with the big brands?
Yeah, I would say there's definitely an interest in some of these emerging brands. A lot of, I mean, like, for instance, we worked with Poppy a few years ago on our tailgate tour, and we had a couple players post for them, and we did something around the Super Bowl with them. I wish we had done the deal in all stock and options, because they just sold to Pepsi for $2 billion. It would have been a nice payday for a bunch of us, including our business. But just the more those stories happen, I think there's going to be a stronger appetite for these opportunities, and thinking creatively about how compensation is structured. A lot of times, some of our highest profile clients, they won't, for any deal now, and they won't even be necessarily with the biggest brands, but they'll be with emerging brands or, kind of establishing brands. They won't do the deal unless there is equity involved. There is usually a cash component as well, but they're like, hey, listen, I'm growing a portfolio of my own personal like brands and whatnot, and I want to be an owner in these businesses and grow them. And so, sometimes that's a non-starter if the conversation doesn't include equity. Like, some of these guys will just have zero interest in it, and that's not with necessarily the NFL partners or the biggest, the Pepsis of the world. It's, with some of these emerging technology companies or CPG brands, whatever it may be. They're like, hey, listen, it's equity, or, I'm not necessarily interested. I will say too, on the other side of that, there is usually some sort of, upfront cash component too, which, I understand isn't everyone's appetite and availability on the brand side of things. It's just kind of the way it works. These guys, they want to be owners and investors and have, space on the cap table for themselves, but at the same time too, they have to protect themselves. Football specifically is a unique sport in the sense that the careers can be super short, and so you got to maximize every dollar on and off the field. And so, if there's a way to mix cash and equity, the appetite, the list gets very long when those are the conversations being had, a little bit shorter when it's just a pure equity play, and it's a rookie, and they might not get their second contract, so they really don't have a ton of opportunity, or even from an investment level as well. But the cash equity mix is something that's really, really interesting. And I will say, like, some of these NFL partner deals, yeah, they pay a lot of money, but there is that transactional component to it. I think the earlier stage companies are allowed and kind of have a little bit runway to grow with talent and athletes and tell that story, which I think is a bit unique. Obviously, like, anyone with the marketing budget with tens of millions of dollars behind it can go out and get whoever they want. But when you can strategically position yourself to connect with the right person in the right moment, like, those stories will go a lot further, and the player or the talent, whatever it may be, will be way more excited about it. So yeah.
I think you answered one of our other questions, was talking about how deals are typically structured, equity, cash payment, single endorsements versus a talent working closely. I think you kind of covered most of that. Another comment that's kind of interesting here from our resident compliance expert, Sean Swidler, just mentioning it's important to make sure athletes are using the product and can talk about their authentic experience to comply with FTC rules and product influencer rules, and even, I think, probably FDA compliance messaging. So is that something you think about in these kinds of deals?
Yeah, definitely. You know, I mean, on social media, you have to say that it's a paid partnership or it's some sort of legitimate partnership. Hashtag ad is often, put into some of the ad copy on these posts and whatnot. But yeah, from an FDA standpoint, that's something that we've had to, be very, you know, nuanced on. Is the NFL has a long list of banned substances, and so we can't have any player promote a product that has anything, and it could be a trace of it, it could be the whole recipe, whatever it may be. We have to be very specific, and so that's something with some emerging CPG brands too that I've spoken with, like they not all of them have the specific certifications or whatnot, and so being very particular on that it can happen. I think that's the biggest thing too, is like, I don't want to waste anyone's time, and I don't want them to have any sort of ideas that this could happen or whatever, when the product actually cannot be promoted by an NFL athlete specifically for us. I mean, other sports, there's other rules and whatever, but that's kind of a non-starter. I don't want to get someone excited about, hey, let's do this deal, and then, oh, by the way, are you certified by this, that, whatever? And they're like, no, and I'm like, all right, well, I just wasted 30 minutes of your day. It was great meeting you, but so I think it's very important to be on that schedule as well. And that also lends itself to the point I made earlier about, if the product is allowed, you never know if the training room's going to pick it up, or, some of these people on the team are going to have interest in it. So that's something that a lot of companies are interested in. I just worked on a deal where, there's a strong push from a brand to get into some of the training rooms across the league and the different, teams, both college and pro. And so we want to be able to position the partnership to hopefully lead to those results. And so getting the product in front of the right players at the right time and then having them go back in the off season and be like, hey, I tried out this technology and it was incredible, and we definitely need it in our facility. Those are the things that I would love to build. It doesn't happen all the time. I'm not going to be unrealistic about it, but when it does and it works, it's really impactful for the business. Which, at the end of the day, is my job. I need to connect the brands and at the right time, at the right moment, with the right people. And so, if I'm not doing that, I'm not doing my job.
And that it's kind of a good segue into one more question we have here, and it's really about, if someone wants to get their brand in front of training camps or events, how do they do that? How do they do it with you? Are there additional costs involved? What goes on? What's the process like if that's going to happen?
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy. We have, like, kind of went through some of them, but we're happy to get product in front of our players, of wives and girlfriends, of families, whatever it may be, of other guests at events, whatever we have going on. Depending on the level of commitment, like sometimes there is some fee associated with it, other times there isn't. It's just kind of figuring out how big someone wants to go. If there's players posting about it, if not, like there's all these different levers that we can pull to make sure that we're checking all the boxes for the brand side of things. But yeah, I mean, I have it in these materials on my email on the next thing, but I know Tom said you'd send it over, but I'm happy to talk to anyone about getting involved in these, product opportunities. I think it's a great way, like I said, to get started. And then also too, like I will say, like, I know of other opportunities that we are not involved with, or we have some relationship with, but it doesn't, if there's an opportunity that doesn't work for us or we don't have a solution, like I am more than happy to make a warm introduction to the right opportunity, because, for me, I'd rather, see the brand succeed and build that relationship than, force them to do something that doesn't work and is a waste of time, money, resources, whatever it is. So I mean, one of the stories is actually a brand that I got connected with through you, Tom, and they had interest in being involved with camps and getting in front of players and a younger demographic, and I was able to connect them with a camp group who had a camp with AJ Brown, who's the receiver for the Philadelphia Eagles, and there was some moment there with AJ and the brand, and they got to sample the product to a bunch of young football campers, and so that's not something we do, but I'm happy to make that handoff and introduction when the time is right.
All right. I guess we're kind of at the end of our hour here. Peter, are there any other comments you'd like to share with the group before we close?
No, I mean, I think I think the takeaways kind of speak for themselves, but I want to be a resource for anyone on this call and anyone who's going to listen to this recording. I think I view myself as a brand advocate. I feel very fortunate to work with the high profile players that we have on our roster and the really interesting opportunities we have, from Super Bowl to college tour to anything else in between. We have a lot of things that we're doing on our side of the business. I'm also very well versed in what just kind of happens in the industry. And so if there's anything that I can do to help a brand grow and be successful, that's what I want to do. I'm entrepreneurial by nature. I love helping companies grow and build, and being just really specific on how we can achieve those goals together. So I'm an optimist. I'm a realist, and I want to help anyone here or who will listen to this help grow what they're looking to do. So yeah, don't hesitate to reach out. I had my information on the last slide. I don't know, Tom, if you're going to share these materials around, but
We will
um,
send these materials around, and I put your contact information in the chat right at the beginning of the chat, and I'll leave it there for another second before we close, so people can go
awesome.
up and take a look. And I really thank you for being here, Peter. I
Can I
think this
ask a
is
question? I'm so
oh,
sorry.
sure.
Can I ask
We
a question to
have time.
Peter?
Yeah.
I actually have a company and a brand that would be interested in partnerships. Would you be open to taking a meeting?
Of course. Yeah,
Yep. It's
let's do it.
Horne at athletesfirst.net. HORNE at athletesfirst.net.
Okay, let me make sure I have that.
And
Or
if
not.
you,
Okay,
if,
so I can just
if
send
you
you an
don't
email.
have it, just reach out to me.
Yeah,
Okay.
exactly. Just shoot me an email and we'll get some time in the books.
All
All
right.
right. So with that, we're going to close. I'm going to thank you, Peter. The comments coming in, everybody really liked it. I really appreciate you being here, and I'm looking forward to continuing a relationship with you for our Brandjectory brands and getting more brands in front of you. So again, if you have questions, it is Horne at athletesfirst.com. If you want to reach out to me or Susan, Tom at brandjectory.com, Susan at brandjectory.com. And thank you, Peter, and I hope we can have you back soon.
Awesome. Thank you all for
All right.
joining, and
Take care.
looking
Thanks,
forward to it.
everybody. Bye-bye.
Take care.